right. Hey, everybody on the square. We are back with another episode of this community spotlight series that I'm doing to build community and also just selfishly as an excuse for me to be able to talk to some of you. And today we're joined with Frank Suarez. Frank, thanks for coming.
Hey, Andrew, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here and just have a moment of chat.
Yeah, absolutely. And before I get too far, where can people find your work and you online?
So I have a website, fsuarez.tv, and also still some things maybe left on Vimeo, but most of my stuff is going to be on my website, which needs some updating already, but just been busy with work.
Yep, I feel like a reel gets outdated just about as soon as you publish it. I mean, mine is for sure.
Yeah.
And I think the other obvious place that people can find you is simply here on the square. So that leads right into the first point that I wanted to ask you about was just, could you tell us a little more about Frank Suarez, who you are, and what you do?
Yeah, certainly. So I was born in Cuba, the little island in the Caribbean. I left when I was 4, and I grew up in Latin America. And I started going to the movie theater I had literally a movie theater in the corner of my house. Like my sister and I would go every Saturday. It was like matinee, and so it was cheaper. And I watched like all the Disney classics, and it was pretty much like me and her alone in the movie theater. It was pretty crazy. It was like an old decrepit thing. There was bats flying in the roof because it was so dark. But I loved it. That was like my experience to animation. That's where I fell in love with animation. I didn't know years later that I would end up doing this as a living. So from there, I did other things. I studied music. I have a music degree. Then I became a missionary. I went with a church to Latin America. That's where I met my wife. And I started, after that, after a while, I started going into like the customer service, e-commerce industry, just trying to find where I was, but I was never really satisfied. I was never really happy until I had a chance to do an animation do like a little promo for one of the products that we were launching in the company I was working for. And that's when I discovered like After Effects, Andrew Kramer, and I just like devoured it. I was like, oh my gosh, this is it. This is what I want to spend the rest of my life doing. I was already kind of in my 30s, mid 30s, wife, 2 kids. So it was kind of scary to make that decision. Like, am I really going to be able to do something that it seems like only young people are doing? And like, you got like 16, 18-year-olds doing amazing things. And here I am having to learn from scratch. But I told my wife, like, this is what I want to do. This is what I want to study. So we were actually living in Colombia at the time. We were living like in the mountains, this idyllic like cottage up in the mountains. Like it was beautiful. We were like away from civilization. Uh, and so we had to like make the decision to leave that lifestyle and move to Miami. We were gonna live with my parents for a couple of years, and I love my parents, but it's like all of us in the house with the kids. I was going to school full time. Then I was going to school full time, got a job full time. So it was kind of a very intense period of time in my life. But my wife totally supported me, and that's where I started back in 2010. Yeah, so 2010, I went to school. I went to Miami International University of Art and Design. Graduated from there, and then I was already working for a church as a motion designer. So that was cool because I was able to like a lot of my homework assignments were like what we were going to show uh, for promos and stuff, which was kind of a rare thing for most of the students. They didn't have that chance. Um, and then from there, as soon as I graduated, like one of my fellow students, he was working for a studio, and he said, "Hey, what would it take for you to come work for us?" And I was like, I really liked the job that I had. I was super happy working at the church. It was like such a cool atmosphere, and it was fun. It's total creative freedom. It's like pretty much like do whatever you want. Uh, and I knew this was going to be a little bit more corporate. So I was like, um, I told them like twice what I was making. I was like, there's no way they're going to pay me this like right out of school. They're not going to like double my salary overnight. And he said yes. So I was like, what the heck? So as soon as I graduated, I was like off to a small little studio in Miami. The work was, it was good, getting to know the people, kind of doing more commercial work. It was a lot of like web stuff, but that's where I started cutting my teeth more with like, real client work. So that's from there. I started freelancing after a while. That's when I discovered School of Motion, started TAing, and after a couple of years, I was offered the position of head teaching assistant. That's been super fun, being able to work with the teaching assistants, being able to work with students. So yeah, at least that's it today. So
Wow, I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. That you've lived an interesting life already. That's crazy. I think the part that stuck out to me that I would love to know a little bit more about, and maybe other people on the square could relate to, is when you actually decided to make that transition.
mhm,
Um, the I'm sure you mentioned it's kind of a big decision, but like,
mhm.
what were some of the things that enabled you to successfully change careers to become a full-time motion designer, and how did you know that it was the right time to make that leap?
Uh, I probably didn't know it was the right time. I was very scared. I had a very supportive wife. I mean, I knew for a long time that I wanted to do something with production. I thought it was with the music side, so I had like done like a little studio in my house. I bought equipment. I built my machine, I built my own like digital audio workstation, and I really thought it was going to be through like music. But the music industry was very different from the MoGraph industry in the sense of like it's really hard to get in. There's really I don't know. I could never get in, and I know now why. It's just I didn't have the skill set for that industry. But the moment that I saw Andrew Kramer had this like basic training, like boot camp. I don't know if you've seen it. It's probably still somewhere in his website. It's like 10 After Effects tutorials.
Oh, yeah, 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 it's like a whole
Yeah,
series.
yeah, it's like a little mini series of him. Like this is like basic training, and he even has like like the star, like the military thing. And when I did that, I felt like I totally understand this. I totally get it. Um, and this is like I worked till like 2, 3 a.m. in the morning, which is probably something that a lot of us kind of it happens to a lot of us when we first discover motion graphics. We get so like wrapped up in it. We get so excited that I just didn't want to go to sleep. I couldn't stop thinking about how I was going to like animate this part or the other. Um, and so I really got hooked, but I also made an assessment like I can see myself doing this. And even by judging at the time, even the piece that I made, which obviously I look at it now, I'm like, okay, there's a lot of mistakes in there, but it still holds up for being like my very first one. And I think I got a sense of like I can do this as a career. I didn't know about like school, but I didn't know about like the motion graphics industry. I didn't even know probably it was called that way. I just had an intense kind of feeling of like this is what I want to do, and I can see myself doing this for hours on end without wanting to stop and making it sustainable. But I didn't know like what that would transition to. Like, how's this gonna happen? Am I gonna get a job? Do I freelance? Like, none of that was in the horizon. And probably if it would have been, I would have probably been very scared of making the decision. Another thing that helped me probably was the fact that I did a lot of research in terms of like uh, I didn't know about School of Motion back then, and I don't know that I would have done School of Motion necessarily back like 10 years ago. I don't even think it was around because I was like coming from another country. I was already in my 30s, and I'm like, what I need is a degree so that I can have something to show. That's what I thought at the time. It's like I need a degree. Nowadays, it's like nobody's ever asked me for my degree.
Yeah.
Like I graduated like summa cum laude of my class. Like nobody's ever like this is probably the first time I've ever get to say that. Like it
Well,
doesn't matter.
congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Uh, I worked really hard, and that was the thing. Like I knew I was gonna work hard because I'm like I don't have the time that an 18-year-old has. Like I have to like take this very seriously. So another thing that helped was I did some research, and the only accredited school nearby where I was, or in the States, was either in Miami, which is where I had grown up and my parents were, or then I would have to like travel to other places, like maybe SCAD or something like that. But the
Mm.
prices were,
Yeah.
way higher, and I had a lot of credits from um, college, so I was able to transfer half of my credits
Nice.
from college, which meant that a $90,000 career turned into like a $45,000 career. And I was like, $45,000, it's doable with, Pell Grants and all of that. It ended up being, maybe like 40.
Hmm.
So I'm like, okay, $40,000 sounds better than 90, and I'll have a degree and I'll be able to do it. So
Yeah. I mean,
those are the only things I had figured out. The rest was a cloud.
and the other part that you touched on, just backtracking a little bit, is the just your involvement with School of Motion. I think that not everybody knows that, like, a lot of the staff at School of Motion who don't have explicitly motion design jobs actually are motion designers. Um, do you like, what role does After Effects and motion design play in your career right now?
Great question. Actually, it's playing more and more of a role now. I'm taking on more projects for internal projects where I get to do animation and design. So that's a lot of fun. And even as I've been full time teaching assistant, I still, I've gotten to work on some projects. I'm always kind of asking around, like, hey, is there any project I can get into? And it's going to progressively be more and more. There's some cool changes and things that we're exploring in the team. So I'm going to get to do more animation and design, which is awesome.
Hmm.
That's kind of my happy place. So yeah, I've gotten to work more and more on it. And the idea is that eventually my goal would be to be full time just doing design animation. So
Hmm.
we'll see where that goes.
Yeah, you've done projects with some of the biggest studios, the motion design studios out there. Like, you worked with Jorge and Ordinary Folk, and I think that transitions nicely into um, the section where I'd like to talk about maybe a project or two that you've been involved in. There's a couple projects that I would love to hear more about. It depends on the time, but specifically, I guess. Well, which ones are you most proud of? Because I mean, they're amazing. A lot of this work is just
Oh,
top tier stuff.
thanks, man. Thanks. Well, I'm super proud of like the work that I've done with Ordinary Folk and with Jorge. I can probably start with those.
Perfect. That's where
Th-
I was hoping you'd go. Actually,
This was a really fun project that I got to work on with Ordinary Folk, and actually it was for the Bible Project, which was another dream that I had. I was like, one of my dreams was like to work with Jorge and Ordinary Folk, and then also to do something for the Bible Project, which, for those viewers that are not aware, is actually a really amazing animation studio out of Portland, and they do Bible stories that are animated, but they're like super well animated, and they get more into like the hermeneutics and just more kind of theology and stuff that is really kind of fun to watch, and a lot of questions that people have always had maybe about the Bible if you're into that kind of stuff. But it makes it very accessible, and it just makes it fun to watch because you're like watching the animation, and they're trying to explain very involved concepts with animation. So I got to work with Jorge and for the Bible project, and my shot was actually the whole piece. If you watch it, is very 2D flat illustrative style, very abstract. Characters are very abstracted, and I had kind of like the only shot that was more kind of real world based, and the shot that I had to animate was a book, which you don't realize how hard it is to animate a book until like you have to animate it, and then you're like, wait a minute, I thought this was going to be like just a page opening, and it turns out it's quite complicated because you have like the spline, and then you have like just so many physical things happening for you to see how a book actually opens. Let me kind of pull you out of the way. And the challenge here is that the actual frame that I got was this one. So this was like the actual frame, which is like a super flat 2D frame, but has some 3D in it. So I'm like, how do I open this very flat looking book? And so I ended up like trying a couple of different methods, and it was a combination of things like masking and stuff. But I like the base of the pages was actually Element 3D, which is kind of
Jeez.
my default thing. So here you can see some basic rigging of, just like a page. I had to like think about forward and back. I had to think about a whole bunch of things that you normally wouldn't think about when you're having to animate some other things. It has to make sense in a book. I didn't have shadows because it's very flat, so I had to like play with like shading. I had to like animate the shading for it to work, and just some basic displacement of the geometry, which is again very basic. The whole trick was just kind of in the timing to make it seem like it was fluid. But
Jeez, it turned
uh,
out beautifully. And you did this all in Element 3D?
yeah, I love Element for some reason. It's kind of like if you've ever watched my big fat Greek wedding, and you know how the dad sprays Windex on everything to fix, like Element 3D is like my Windex. I kind of go to it for a lot of things, just because you're able to do even more than just this kind of geometry stuff. Like I've used, um, this is probably my confession, is that I use Element 3D for things that probably you don't need them, but like this is Element 3D. Just because of the fact that I can use this. Let me see if it's here. This is kind of a very old project, but
It still holds up though.
so that like this whole replicating thing, I'm like, okay, I can use a replicator shape, but I want it to like offset, and then I want it to like scale, and I'm like, how do I do that? And I'm like, well, Element 3D has a replicator in it, so let me just throw it in there.
That's
So
so
I use it as a
smart.
replicator, yeah, just to replicate stuff that would like, sorry, like this is like, no, that's not element. That's like flat to D, but somewhere else in here, I use it again. Oh, I know. Here, like this part right here, where all the arrows come in.
Oh,
So I'm like, because I had kind of a tight deadline. I'm like, I specifically want these to rotate, but I want them to be offset. And I knew I can accomplish this with just an instance of like a little, shape, and then just being kind of replicated in, I think it might have been like a ring or something like that. I can't remember exactly how I did it, but all of this was just, replicating a whole bunch of little things.
man, that's I honestly would have never thought to do that, but it actually is probably much friendlier on your processor as well. Because After Effects and like repetitive instances of elements is not the best combination. I'm probably going to steal that trick, to be honest, because that's so smart.
Yeah, I mean, it renders really fast. I'm trying to think like other places where I've used. I mean, these coins are probably element. Like I don't know. I probably use it. I probably use it when I shouldn't use it.
If it
But
works,
it just, yeah, it just ends up being a tool that I can. This is all probably flat stuff, but I'm sure I used element in here somewhere. Like this is probably, no, this is all like 2D stuff, but I'm sure at some point I used element in this one too. Like there's always a chance for element to be used.
jeez, that's yeah. Andrew Kramer would be proud.
It's funny. One time, years ago, somebody asked on Twitter, like, "Hey, can I get like this cell shader effect on Element 3D?" I could probably still pull it up somewhere, and like people started answering, like, "No, you can't do it yet," yada yada. And then Andrew himself answered, and he's like, "No, you can't really get it." And I'm like, I don't know what they're talking about. And I actually got the look that this person was after, and I posted it, and everyone was kind of like, "Whoa, that's cool." It was very kind of cheesy. It was all cheated out. But then like Andrew followed me. I'm like, "What just happened?" Yeah, I just like, how did this even happen? It was such a cheesy little moment, but it was funny.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So I mean, there's always ways for you to cheat stuff. That's what I find. If there's any takeaways, I know that there's, people that are very math oriented, so they like Greg, um, from Ordinary Folk. He's like, he'll come up with these amazing, crazy expressions and rigs. I'm more of the type of like, if it's gonna take me more than 10 minutes to figure out the rig, it's probably better to just brute force my way into it, and I'll deal with the consequences later of having to revise the time. But probably not as smart as making a rig, but that's kind of how my brain operates. So
How did you, by the way, how did you get in cahoots with Jorge and Ordinary Folk? I think you've actually told me this in another like previously, but I'd love to hear one more time how you guys got connected.
Yeah. Jorge is a super cool guy, man. He's very down to earth, very friendly. Years ago, gosh, probably like 10 years ago, I just reached out to him on Vimeo. Back when Vimeo was like the place to be in the community and like everybody was hanging out on Vimeo. I just sent him a direct message, just like, hey, love your work. Just thanks for your inspiration. I don't even remember what I said. And he wrote back, he's like, hey, thanks, man. And that was kind of the beginning of it. That was, the first time that I interacted with Jorge. I felt like, wow, it's so cool. This guy takes the time to write back, even though he's like this superstar animator. And then we met in the first blend back in 2014. I actually have some info here, which this is another project I'm super proud of that I like to talk about because it's our
Is that Jeff
super
Goldblum
cool
on the
project.
left?
No, this is Noel Honick
Oh,
and
okay, okay.
Jesper.
Yeah, yeah,
These are my two buddies that I met at Blend, and we ended up coming up with this Motion Corps game, which I can talk about
yeah, yeah.
afterwards.
I was hoping you'd get to that actually.
Yeah, so I met Jorge at the first Blend, and I just walked up to him. Of course, he had people all around him, so I found like this one moment, like 1 minute, where there was no one around him. I just went up to him and introduced myself. Starstruck, of course. He was super cool, just very down to earth, very friendly. I just told him like, hey man, I would love to collaborate on any project that you have. I knew that he worked on like faith-based projects, so I told him if you ever have like a project that you're working on, you need an animator, just let me know. And he said, actually, I do have one. What's your email? And so that was it. Like I just reached out to him, and then we worked on. I think the first project we worked on was The Biggest Story. This one here, which was like a super cool design by Don Clark, and I got to animate a couple of frames on there. This was like a huge project with like a whole bunch of people, amazing animators. So this was fun. I got to work on that. Then we had another project which was Luther,
Mm-hmm.
which was designed by the amazing Romel Ruiz. Was a personal friend, another amazing guy, very very talented illustrator. You guys should definitely go check out his work. Um, and it's a private video now. Ooh, who knew?
Ooh.
That was probably me. I probably changed something that I shouldn't have changed.
Hmm.
Uh,
Well, Luther, everybody can go check out Luther. Oh, there you go. There's some shots. Oh, wow. That behind the scenes is really cool.
yeah, so this is probably a technique from another Andrew Kramer video, which was just how to make some volumetric light through. So I use that for that shot.
Yeah, I think that's CC radial fast blur, not radial blur or CC radial blur. I say that just because I literally just used that same trick like yesterday.
Uh, it's wonderful because sometimes there's so many new things that come out, and you forget that some of the older tricks still apply for certain things. And as motion designers, I think sometimes we get caught up in the idea of like I got to do whatever's newest and fastest and greatest, and sometimes the old still holds up pretty well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I tell people
Yeah.
that if they can watch an Andrew Kramer tutorial and understand everything, you basically got like a whole semester of college in like 45 minutes because there's just so much in it. And a lot of the stuff, like you said, it holds up, especially because most of even if they're older, a lot of the effects, they still are around, they still work.
Yeah.
So, before you leave your site, could you talk a little bit about Motion Corps, which is a really cool
Oh yeah.
project?
Totally. So this was kind of a group little project that we had just for fun. The three of us, we said, "Hey, what if we come up with this concept, this game?" This was back when like MoGraph games were more popular. Uh, Nine Squares was around. There was another one which I'm trying to remember now. Like these collaborative MoGraph games. So we said, "Hey, let's come up with one ourselves and just for the three of us, and let's see what happens." And the idea was Motion Corps, where it was kind of a play on the Exquisite Corpse game, where like it's like a parlor game where you start drawing something, but then you fold it and you leave like a little sliver, and then like the other person has to continue. and then they fold it, and then that concept where then you open it up and you're like, oh man, something came out of it. Everyone kind of started where the other one left off. So what if we do that with animation, where someone, like, you give the next animator your end frame, and then you animate from one frame to the other, and then that person takes it from there and just starts the animation. So we just said, hey, let's do this for fun, just the three of us. And Noel was connected with School of Motion at the time. He had, I believe, his AEK class had just come out or was about to come out, and so he had a lot of contacts. And he said this would be fun to give to a lot of students, just because they can create some cool opportunities for them to collaborate, and then to be able to get just some opportunities to also just animate, just with other people. What does it look like when you're in a process with other people, animating and just having fun? So we said, okay, just the three of us, and then Noel started getting some interest from students, and from like literally one day to the other, we had like waiting list of people that wanted to play the game and wanted to play the episodes. And so it ended up being, at some point, we had this massive spreadsheet of like hundreds of people that wanted to play the game. We had episodes. We had to like calculate color palettes and all this fun stuff. But early on in the process, we said, what if we, the game was getting so much traction. We said, what if we invited some of our kind of superstar animators that we all follow and love, and we just invite them to play the game. We tell them what the rules are, and let's see. We were doubtful that people were going to say yes, just because they were busy, but we managed to get an episode with Phil Borst, Jorge, Al Boardman, Andrew Embury, and Ariel Costa. I mean, like, there's so much superpower in that episode alone that we were like, oh my gosh, what did we do? Like, how did we manage to get all these people for free to play a game? And I think the cool part about it is there was nothing, even at the time we were posting this, we didn't even put our own names on it. We didn't even put like we produced it. I guess we were all like so busy in playing the game that we were like not really doing it for any recognition at all. It was just more like to have fun. And I think that that kind of came across in the way we were expressing it to other people, and they were like, yeah, let's do it for fun. We have another like super packed one with like B. Grandinelli, Lynn Fritz, Rachel Yonda, Bethany Levy, Kelly Anderson, like just some amazing names. This one is with Alan Lassiter, Brian Gossett, Louis Wasilowski, David Stanfield, Emmanuel Colombo, Jordan Scott, like, just some
That's insane.
crazy, talented, amazing names. Oh yeah. So these are, and these three are kind of like superstar power on there, but there's some other ones that have maybe lesser known names, but the animations are still amazing. It's so cool to watch all this come together, just from like random bits. It just works. It's so cool.
Absolutely. At least in the motion design community, Motion Corps is pretty well known. And I wish that it was still around. And I assume you guys just ran out of time.
Yeah, well, we felt like it had reached kind of its shelf life, if you will,
Hmm.
in terms of like the amount of time that we can dedicate to it, because it was literally like we were handling the production of it, in terms of like there was 5 people per episode, and then like we had deadlines when we wanted to put these out, but then like we had to send instructions to all of them, and then they had questions, we had to answer them back, and we had to manage the backlogs of the new episodes with color palettes. And so yeah, it just became kind of a lot to handle. And but it was really rewarding. Like, the three of us took turns to do it, and so it never really felt like a burden. It just, it felt like at one point it just felt like, okay, this is like kind of the natural conclusion or ending point of it. One of
Yeah.
the cool things about this too is that a lot of the animators ended up putting their piece on their reel, which we were happy about. And so it just, what I kind of understood from that is that even these superpower animators still needed a venue to try out their own personal ideas that they could then be proud of. And
Mm.
so, like, JR, I think, has this on his portfolio. Um, I think Even Ariel Costa might have this in his portfolio. Like I've seen this in Jay Scott's.
Yep.
I've seen like I even saw this in Alan Lasseter's reel. So we were like super proud that even this one in Emmanuel's reel as well. So we were proud of that too. So that was fun.
Absolutely. And speaking of things coming to an end, clever transition there. I like to end these little episodes with a section where we talk about a low light and a highlight from your career so far. And low light, it doesn't have to be some huge, like, big deal bad time. It could, if you want to talk about that. But maybe a mistake you made, an amusing story, maybe what you learned from it. We can also skip it completely if you want. But is there um, any stories from your career that stick out as maybe a low light?
Yeah, I mean, there's many. I think there's a initially it was very scary to be able to make the plunge into motion design. And I know a lot of people, even from talking to a lot of students, which is one of the reasons that I love the opportunity to interact with students, is I see a lot of my own initial fears in a lot of people. Like, am I too old to start this? Or even if you're young, am I good enough? And there was definitely that tension there at the beginning. I could say that's a low point where I was probably studying full time, working full time. It was very taxing, physically, emotionally. Um, it at some points I wanted to quit school and like go back to corporate America and say like I got to feed my family, I got to buy a house. This is just like too taxing on me emotionally and physically. But I had a very supportive family, and we made it through. So that was probably like a low point. Was I'm not gonna lie, it was tough. The transition was tough. There was a lot of sacrifice and a lot of hard work, but it ended up paying off. So yeah.
I'll say. I mean, I've noticed a pattern that, like, you basically, it seems like, whether or not you intend to, but it seems like you've kind of set something in your sights, and there has been some risk, but you kind of calculate that risk, and then after a big investment of money and time and energy, I mean, you've worked with Jorge, you did Motion Corps, you work at School of Motion. I mean, you're a well-respected motion designer. I don't really feel like that's an accident. I don't know where I was going with that, except just, I don't know, uh,
Thanks, man.
blanket praise for Frank. What would you say to someone who, I guess, to those two groups that you mentioned, the person who it maybe is young but wonders if are they good enough, and then the person who's not young and wonders if it's too late?
That's an excellent question. Look, there's one of the ways that I kind of see it now that I've probably matured a little bit more in my view of what we do as an industry. I mean, we're motion designers, and I know that there's always this argument of like art versus design and all of that. But a lot of what we do is commercial work. We don't just do it for the sake of doing it, although we can. I mean, we can animate just for the sake of animating, but we are participating in a trade that can be learned, right? So it's not like, oh, you got to be born, like Jimi Hendrix, like this amazing guitarist, and then you'll be able to be an artist. Like there is artistry in it, but you can learn the ropes. You can learn your way. You can put in practice kind of the principles and just learn. And I see this all the time with students where they begin very rough because you're having to learn the software, right? You're having to learn like how to use After Effects, which can be daunting. But I'm going to steal this from Ryan Summers because he says design is the one software that you learn once, and it is like a software. It's a set of principles. It's a set of underlying things, but everyone can learn them. Like you don't just have to like be some sort of Da Vinci to learn them. You learn like composition, rhythm, color, uh, value, all of that stuff. And yes, you can.
Hmm.
Yes, you can. You got to put the time and effort, but yes, you can. Are you going to be, you're going to make millions out of it? Who knows? People did.
Yes, the
But
people.
yeah, that's another story. Now, another thing that I would say to students is be open-minded, because sometimes where you think you're going to go, you may end up discovering along the way that you have a talent for something better or different, right? So you may really love animation, but you find out like I'm really not great at animation. And that can be okay. Like maybe illustration is your thing. Or maybe you have a talent for art directing and there's no shame in it. It's not like, oh, if you can't animate, then you become a teacher. Like none of that stuff. It's really being open-minded to what are my core strengths and what do I bring to the table. And maybe I'm not a great animator myself, but I know what a great animator looks like and I can find them for the right project. Like that's a talent, and that's a very special needed talent, by the way. So
After lowlights, let's end on a highlight.
yeah.
What's one or a few of some highlights that stick out so far in your career?
Oh gosh. I would probably say like one really cool highlight, and this is a very rare opportunity that I didn't realize I was having at the time, was actually working for the church. And regardless of like, your belief, it has nothing to do with that. Is I would work on stuff during the week, and that stuff will be played in front of thousands of people in the weekend. But here's the cool thing: I got to sit in the crowd, and I actually got to physically experience people's reactions to my work. And there's just something really weird and visceral about that, because I would like, I knew like a promo. Most of the time it was just promos for things that were coming up, conferences, a new series or whatever. So I would just kind of sit there like a fly on the wall. Nobody knew me. Like it didn't promote that much, like who was doing stuff. So I was just sitting there like a regular Joe Schmo, and I would just kind of look at everybody while the videos would be playing. I would see like people, and sometimes they will laugh, and sometimes they will like, I've seen people cry, and sometimes I've seen people clap. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is like so cool, because I have like this experiment that I can, like week after week, I can put stuff out that I know it's going to touch the audience in a different way. So I, it's very different now that I put out work and people see it kind of in their bedroom, and I don't get to see that reaction. So that was kind of a highlight in the sense of being able to experience that. I think is very unique for motion designers to experience.
Mhm.
And probably a huge highlight is just being able to be at School of Motion for sure. And I don't just say that because I work here now, but it definitely is an amazing team. Joey is a great just leader. He definitely cares about the people in the team. He cares about the industry, and the team and the work that we do. Like we have gotten so many testimonials from students that I'm not joking. Like we get teary eyed. Like people, it sounds cheesy, but like people's lives have changed because they put in the time, and they've been able to make a career change. They're like, we just had someone tell us like, I don't even know if I can share this, but because of what they learned in expression session, they were able to change an operating system that just recently came out, which I don't know, about 1 billion people get access to.
Yeah.
And this is like crazy. Like from an expression session class, this person went into a team and was able to do something that the developers were trying to do for years and they couldn't. And because of the knowledge that this person got there, it was like, oh yeah, I can do that. Here you go. 1 billion people can see what you did. I was like, so these stories, like we're listening to them all the time, and they're real. So that to me is a highlight, is being able to see that I get to work in motion design. I get to work in the school that definitely is making a huge impact on the industry. So yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, my name is on that list of people whose lives and careers have changed from School of Motion, animation boot camp. I was like on the fence if I should sign up because it's a lot of money, and like I was trying to transition to be like full time solo motion designer, and like easily the best decision I've made in my career was taking that course. Um,
Yeah.
so just to land the plane here one more time, where can people find more of your work?
You can go to fsuarez.tv.
Mm-hmm.
You can also go on schoolofmotion.com and see the About page, and I'll be there as well.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Frank, for taking the time. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you, Andrew. Thanks so much for spending the time with me.